Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 397, Animal Protection Laws with Camille Labchuk and Jessica Scott-Reid.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Camille Labchuk and Jessica Scott-Reid about animal protection laws in North America. And if you've ever wondered if there are laws protecting wildlife, livestock, or even your pets, then this is definitely the podcast for you. We talk about the work that Camille did with animal justice to free Willie and a lot of the work that they're doing now. And they both talk to us about transportation laws, fur farming, ag-gag laws, adopting animals, and so much more. A great episode to share with anybody who loves animals, whether they are vegan, plant-based, or not.
Camille is an animal rights lawyer and executive director of Animal Justice, Canada's only animal law advocacy organization. Under her leadership, Animal Justice fights legal cases in courtrooms across the country, works to pass groundbreaking new laws, and ensures industries are held accountable for illegal animal cruelty. Jessica is a journalist and animal advocate. She covers animal and vegan topics for media across Canada and beyond, including the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Winnipeg Free Press, and others. She's also a co-host of the Paw and Order podcast. Enjoy this episode and please share it out.
Greens powders can be very scary because there's toxicity, heavy metals, there's fillers, there's all kinds of things. And we know that so many of you have been emailing us asking, what do we use so that you will know what to use? So we are so glad we found BioFi Limitless Greens. We trust the product, we trust the people behind it, and we've gotten you a discount coupon. So go to www.biofishop.com/plants. That's biofyshop.com/plants, or click the button in the show notes to grab your discount code and get your greens now.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
Once again, I am very grateful for connections, and I've made a connection with an amazing photographer halfway across North America who was able to do online photo shoots with me, and it was so much fun, and I'm so grateful for the experience.
I'm grateful for the weather we've been having in this February. It's usually a very cold time of year, and it has been cold, but when I go for my runs, I dress for it, and just having those blue skies with the sun shining has really made a big difference.
Camille Labchuk and Jessica Scott-Reid, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
What a pleasure to be here.
Woohoo!
It's a party.
It's a party. It's a foursome today. Amazing. So we are super excited to talk about all things animal justice for animals in various parts of our lives. And before we do, we always love to ask our guests if they have a moment of gratitude that they'd like to share with us. Jessica, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm extremely grateful for my daughter. Her name is Clover. She is the embodiment to me of everything that I am working towards and trying to make the world a better place. And she reminds me on a daily basis of why I do the things I do.
I think it's important to have a why and know. And she sounds really cute.
And kids can do that too. They give us a different perspective on everything. So it's very interesting as we grow. Yeah.
Great. Camille, what about you?
Well, I'm grateful for some skills I picked up over the last year. We've all been struggling, I know, for the past 12 months in unprecedented circumstances. But one thing that it's given me an opportunity to work on is my patience. I'm someone who wants things to happen immediately, and that's not always possible, especially not these days. And so I've been focusing on patience and trying to cultivate it, and I'm grateful for that.
And I think that's really great to be vulnerable and tell other people what we're working on, because we often celebrate all of our wins online and we say, we did this, we accomplished that. But to be, I'm working on accomplishing this, I'm working on something that I know that I need to grow into, is definitely very empowering, not only for yourself, but for other people too. So thank you for taking that route today.
Great point.
So Camille, why don't you tell us how you found a plant-based and vegan lifestyle?
Sure. Well, I was 12 when I first went vegetarian, and I was one of those kids who loved animals. I had cats, I had bunny rabbits, we had hamsters, and I'd never really thought about the animals I ate or thought about eating animals at all. I just ate what I thought was food. But when I was 12, my mother and I watched a documentary on, I think it was on the CBC, and I don't remember exactly what it was about, but it was about abusing animals in some horrible way, possibly bears in China used for bear bile. But even though it wasn't directly, I don't think, about eating animals for food, for some reason it sparked in me just this idea that I needed to opt out of using animals and not participate in that system any longer. So luckily, my mom decided to go veg with me. She's been veg off and on in previous years. And kind of all went from there. I sort of reverted back in high school, I guess, due to peer pressure or wanting to fit into eating chicken fingers occasionally. But when I got to university, I sort of re-entrenched myself in those values. Eventually, I was fortunate enough to be able to go out to the seal hunt. And it's funny that I say I was fortunate to witness the seal hunt because it's not something that anyone should ever have to witness, let alone animals should have to experience that or workers should have to participate in it. But the turning point for me is that I met a lot of other people who were vegan. And I hadn't really understood, I did understand veganism and I'm sort of aspired to be vegan prior to that, but I hadn't been around other vegans and I didn't feel that social support or that sense of community. This was in 2007, before there were a ton of us and before we were as well organized with Facebook groups and social media support. So for me, just A, being around all those vegans inspired me to take that same step, and B, being enmeshed with people who worked in animal advocacy showed me that that was the potential career path too.
That's great that it was able to start at such a young age. So if it did, what we normally ask people is, did anything change for you? And we normally think about health and sometimes, mental health as well in there. But did anything change for you there in terms of your quality of life?
I would say probably not. Even before we were vegetarian as a family, we ate very little meat. A, because we didn't have a lot of resources. We were on the lower income end of the spectrum. And my mom was always excellent at cooking a lot of pulse-based dishes to start with, both for financial and health reasons. So I was lucky to have that foundation. So I would say my diet didn't change a ton during that time, except for cutting out a couple of things, but we still ate a lot of great healthful food. So it didn't change a lot, but psychologically, I think it's launched me into a new life direction.
And because of that, do you think that it helped you grow and become a more compassionate person overall, and not just towards animals, but towards everything that you do?
I think it probably did. Yeah, although I think sometimes that those seeds were planted, but they perhaps took a longer time to take root in some places. I mean, I was very passionate about animals and the issues associated with them, but it wasn't until somewhat more recently, it was a while ago, but more recent than my 12-year-old self, that I became really aware of and concerned with multiple ways that the meat industry, for instance, harms the environment, harms workers, especially harms low-income communities and racialized communities. So that was a bit more of a revelation over time.
Great.
And what about you, Jessica? How did you find plant-based or vegan?
Yeah, I was kind of an on and off again vegetarian when I was younger. I remember coming upon videos from PETA when I was in my early 20s and decided to go vegetarian while I was in university. I think I was not very good at it. This was at a time when I think we didn't have as much access to education as we have now, information on nutrition. I was sort of living off of Kraft Dinner and peanut butter sandwiches. I ended up becoming anemic, as you could expect. Didn't have the B12 supplement that I should have. And I gave it up when I moved to Europe for a while. And then I really got onto the train of trying to find ethical ways of eating animal products. I went really out of my way to try and travel to farms to buy happy meat for a number of years, to try and get only eggs from sanctuaries, from rescued chickens. It just was taking so much effort. And finally, once I had my daughter, I really had to decide what I was going to feed her. I was in charge of feeding this small child food, and she was just this unknowing and trusting being, and I really couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't hand her over some animal body and think that that was okay. And at the same time, in my work as a journalist, I was writing a lot about animal welfare issues. I was working with animal justice on issues like barn fires and animal transport, and I kept trying to find ways to end my articles that made it make sense, like that there was some sort of solution to this, like better laws or better oversight, and really ultimately realized that the answer was that they shouldn't be there to begin with. So I decided to go vegan 4 years ago during Veganuary when it first started, and I just never stopped. I found the cooking enjoyable. I found the way I felt was notable, and all of the nutrition information out there to guide me on how to do it properly left me feeling great. So here I am 4 years later, celebrating celebrating my 4-year anniversary last month and never looking back. And my daughter is a 4.5-year-old healthy, happy little vegan too.
Beautiful. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, I'm assuming she's completely vegan and Clover's growing like a clover.
Yes, she is. That's exactly right. Well said.
Jessica, you mentioned PETA before, and some of our audience might not be familiar with who PETA is. Can you just let them know?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that they're probably the most pioneering animal rights group in our world, people for the ethical treatment of animals. I remember them putting out really profound work in the early 2000s that brought together the dog meat trade in Asia and comparing it to, say, the way that we farm and slaughter pigs in North America. And, you know, having that connection made was really profound for me at a young age. And I don't think I've eaten pigs for over a decade. And I think a lot of people start there, that sort of comparison with dogs and pigs and the fact that pigs are more intelligent than dogs. And PETA was really sort of instrumental in those early years in getting that message out to people. And it really stuck for me.
Thank you.
And PETA has a kids division as well. And I actually find PETA can go both ways. If you're looking for extreme, you can definitely find extreme. If you need something a little bit more subtle to get into, because that extreme is not for everyone, you know, they have that too. But there is a kids division, and I find it very tasteful. And I find that it is about education and just understanding animals as animals and not about the horrifying facts of animal industry and things like that.
Yeah, and thankfully there's a lot more organizations now too. PETA seemed to be sort of the only one a long time ago that you could go to for this information. And now we have such a plethora of different organizations doing it in different ways, including animal justice.
Right, and animal justice is where you're both from. So Camille, maybe you could explain to us a little bit about what animal justice is all about.
Sure. Well, let me just say first, I really love hearing Jess's story, because I remember when we'd be interacting when Jess was in that pre-vegan phase and she was, you know, trying to find the right way to do the thing that she probably knew was wrong on the inside.
Yes.
And I just sort of knew. Anna Pippis, who's a former colleague, and I would talk about it all the time. We'd say, oh, yeah, she's going to be vegan. Give it 6 months.
You are so right. You are so right.
Yeah. You mentioned Anna, and we did have Anna on our show a while back, so we'll put a link to her in our show notes too. But yeah, go ahead and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what animal justice is all about.
Sure. So we're Canada's national animal law advocacy organization. And really the reason we exist is because we recognize that there's a serious discrepancy in Canada and around the world between the way we feel, don't just be me or Jess or you folks, but how Canada feels as a country, your average person, how they feel about protecting animals and what protections they deserve, and then what our laws actually say. So what I mean by that is most people, and this is backed up by polls, they don't want animals to suffer, even if they plan to eat those animals or use them in some other way. And we all kind of assume, well, the government's probably looking out for animals in some way. That's their job. That's why we elect governments, is so they can take care of the public interest and protect society. And what we see when it comes to animals is that in many cases, there are almost no laws on the books. So farmed animals is probably the best example of this. There's no national legislation governing how they're treated. There's nothing in the provincial level. So, you know, when you look at issues like how much food, how much water, what types of social opportunities they should have, whether they should be caged 24/7, whether they should have access to fresh air or sunlight, nothing in our laws deals with any of that. It's essentially the industry makes up its own rules. Now, that's just one industry, and you could say similar things about all of the ways that we use animals. So we really exist to try to bridge that gap between the way Canadians believe animals should be treated and what the law requires. And we do that by pushing for stronger laws. We do that by making sure that animals have a voice in court when their interests are at stake in a case, and also by trying to make sure that the laws that actually do exist are enforced. Because sometimes there are laws, but the enforcement agencies just don't do their job due to lack of resources or apathy or other reasons.
There's so much in there that I kind of want to pull apart. So for our American listeners, before we lose them, because I think that this is really important too, because I think the things that they're going to hear today, they're going to want to go and make sure that these things are being done in the States. Are the animal protection laws overall comparable to United States, or are they comparable to us? Are we on the same track? Are we just as bad or just as good? What's happening between the two countries?
You know, it's kind of one of those 6 of one, half a dozen of the other situations. In some ways, Canada might be slightly better, but in a lot of ways, we fall farther behind. So one really progressive, amazing thing for animals that we have seen in the States in the last decade, 15 years in particular, is groups getting active with ballot initiatives. So that's a direct democracy type of work where you can ask citizens in a state to vote on something that you put forward as an advocacy group on the ballot and say, hey, do you agree that we should ban battery cages for chickens, veal crates for cows, gestation crates for mother pigs? And people always say yes, because of course that reflects all of our values. So a number of states like California, Massachusetts, there's I think a dozen or more have enacted these really progressive ballot measures phasing out some of the worst forms of confinement of farmed animals. So that's really positive. But, otherwise the situation is not great. It's similar in that there's no national legislation or regulation of animals' lives on farms. And I won't get into all the other areas of animal use, but, if you're in America, don't rest on your laurels thinking it's that much better, because unfortunately it's not yet.
That's unfortunate. But yet is a positive word, always a positive word. Before, Jessica, you were talking about the transportation of animals. And I think we've all been on the highway where we've seen the truck, and as you get closer to it, you're either going to see cows or pigs or chickens or something, and they're being transported. And I know that there's a lot of work that goes around visuals and things like that. But what kind of laws are there in terms of transporting animals? Like, how do we even get our head around thinking about that in the first place?
Yeah, in Canada here in particular, we've been deemed sort of the worst in the Western world when it comes to animal transport legislation, particularly because of the time limits that we're allowed to keep these animals inside these open-sided trucks without food, water, or rest, and without any limitations on weather, on climate. Chickens, cows, pigs can travel inside of these trucks that have no climate controls any day of the year. There's no temperature above or below which that's stated that, oh no, you can't take them. They are coming and going to slaughter every single day of the year, no matter what. And I think, Camille, was it last year or the year before, they did pass some legislation about decreasing the number of hours that animals could be kept on trucks, but it was so minimal. Like we're still talking, I think, 32 straight hours for pigs, right, Camille?
I think it's still 30, or maybe it went down to 28 and it used to be 36. I can't keep track because there's a lot of different
nonetheless species, yes, it's still an insane amount of time. Like if you think of any time you've spent, say, I always compare it to us on an airplane or on a bus, if you've been on like an 8-hour trip where you were, allowed to have a snack and some water and, rest as you're sitting. And you can think of how horrible that felt after 8 hours. Imagine 28 or 36, and imagine having open-sided trucks and it's the middle of winter in Canada or the blazing hot summer in Canada, and they're in there. And we have activists who have documented animals suffering immensely inside of these trucks.
We wouldn't do that to our personal pets, right? We wouldn't drive with the windows open for 18 hours with sleet and snow coming in and traumatizing our animals that are our pets, and then animals that people are going to be putting into their body for nutrition and for food, then they're letting those animals go through that. You'd want to know that they were better taken care of. There's this comedian that does this skit about Whole Foods and saying, people going in and saying, were these chickens raised nicely, and were they all friends, and were they, did they all get along? People want that nice story of their animals out in pastures being taken care of, but that's not really the case.
No, and unfortunately, a lot of people really want to believe that, because none of us wants to believe that we're causing suffering with our food choices. We all would prefer to accept what the industry tries to market to us, which is this pastoral, small family farm type of environment for animals. But unfortunately, Old McDonald's farm just no longer exists. What we have is these corporate mega factories where, animals are raised by the tens of thousands in some cases, and they're shipped in appalling conditions. And I think for people, when they open their eyes and they see that truth, that can be a very powerful moment. Transport in particular is an interesting question, because it's one of the only times that people actually have an opportunity to come face to face with an animal who's used for food. Otherwise, their lives are hidden behind the closed doors of barns. So I think when some of us are able to see those trucks on the highway, if we drive by a slaughterhouse and we see them waiting outside, I've spoken to countless people who've had a personally transformative moment just by coming face to face with the suffering.
Yeah, it's devastating. I know our daughter had a project, and she, for her project, wanted to go to a slaughterhouse and tell them not to slaughter the animals. Instead, they should raise the animals. And if it wasn't enough money to just raise the animals without slaughtering the animals, that I would bake the cookies and she would sell the cookies, and she would give them money to be able to not slaughter the animals. So the understanding of little kids on their level can have such a big impact. It horrified us that our 9-year-old wanted to go and do that, but it shows some compassion. So now that we're talking about farm animals and transport, what else should people be aware of in terms of laws that either help the animals or don't help the animals enough within the farming industry?
Well, I think another big issue that's come up recently is something your American listeners may already be familiar with because it's been a thing in the States for a while, but we're now seeing it in Canada, and that's called ag gag laws. So that's short for agricultural gag laws. That's a term first coined by New York Times food writer Mark Bittman when these laws started popping up in the States around 2010 or so. And these laws are, to me, one of the most chilling things that we have to contend with on a daily basis. So they're laws that promote agricultural secrecy, and they punish whistleblowers, and they punish people who go undercover in farms to expose the reality of what happens to animals. It's such an important thing to be able, as an animal protection organization, to go undercover at a farm. And the way that typically works is somebody poses as a worker, they get a job at a farm, and they simply film what they see. And, spoiler alert, if you've ever seen any of these investigations, you'll know, but they're heartbreaking. The level of cruelty that's just inherent on a day-to-day basis in farms that goes unquestioned and doesn't even seem to be remarked on by the farm managers is astounding. So when those images are released on the nightly news, obviously it gives a black eye to the entire farming industry, and people start to lose confidence in government regulation, in the meat industry itself, and food safety, and rightly so. So as a result of that, the farm industry has been pushing not to change its ways and make the situation better for animals, for workers, for the environment, but they're trying to pass these laws that cover up cruelty. And we've seen them now come in Alberta, we've seen them in Ontario and Canada, potentially some other provinces, and a number of U.S. states as well. So to me, that's what keeps me up at night.
We've actually had an undercover chicken farmer come on the show and share some of the things of what he was asked to do and what other people do and the mental health issues that come along with the people who are doing this work. And I think part of the underlying story here is that these are people who are desperate for work. They're not desperate to go out and abuse animals. They're desperate for work, to put food on the table, and then what they need to do to be able to do it in the amount of time that they're required to do it just requires awful actions. And it's kind of this cyclical circle, and it's really sad of the impact that has on that person and the family as well.
Let's take a little break so I can tell you about our plant-based comfort foods cookbook. This is comfort food, but I'm telling you, it is healthy. Most of the recipes are gluten-free. All of the recipes, except for 1 or 2 desserts, can be made completely oil-free and have oil-free options right in them. The pictures are going to make you drool. This book is above and beyond what we have put out there before. We're talking about red sweet potato curry, garlic zucchini and tomato pasta, vegan tahini tray bake, tofu pad thai, chocolate brownies. This is amazing. You're going to have enough food for weeks and weeks. And the great thing about this is that we've also included a meal plan and shopping guide to go with it. So if you just wanted to print out that page and go shopping, you'll know exactly what to make for the next 2-3 weeks. This is incredible. Please check it out in the show notes, or you can go to planttrainers.com/shop and check out our plant-based comfort foods cookbook. Guys, this is going to blow you away. And now back to the show.
Yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking. People can be frustrated when they see cruelty on those tapes and blame the workers. And I always say it is not the workers' fault. They are victims of the meat industry in the same way that the animals are. They're exploited in the same way. They're, as you point out, typically from vulnerable communities, a lot of new immigrants, sometimes temporary workers. For any U.S. listeners, they're probably already well aware that a lot of undocumented workers are able to work in slaughterhouses, and that really becomes their only option. So it's just a terrible situation all around.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many people out there that know this is going on, but don't want to really know that this is going on. They don't really want to know how their food's getting onto their plate. They just want to eat what they like eating and avoid hearing about this stuff. What do we say to those people that perhaps know it's happening, don't want to admit it's happening, or how do we teach them that it is happening so they can correlate between the food that's coming from the farm that's landing on their plate?
I think that's the holy grail, right? Figuring out how to do that is sort of something all activists and advocates are trying to figure out. There's so many different inroads to having that information be known, and it really depends on the person, right? We have now such a variety of reasons why going plant-based is beneficial, right? We have the health benefits that we're learning about now, the nutritional aspects of giving up meat, dairy, and eggs. We have environmental issues associated with animal agriculture that's now coming to light regarding impacts on climate change. And of course, we have the ethics now too regarding animal cruelty. And it's thanks to undercover whistleblowers, investigators, activists going on farms, that things that have so long been hidden from public eye are now coming to light. We have smartphones, we have social media. So this sort of brick wall that's kept this stuff hidden for so long is slowly being taken down. And I think it really depends on the person, which one of those things is going to get them to think about the choices they're making about the food on their plate and how it impacts the world around them.
So you're sitting here now with Puppy on your lap for those people who are watching it on YouTube. What's this one's name?
This is Boo. He's my pandemic puppy rescue dog. And anytime I am on here with the microphone, he has to sit on my lap. I don't know why. It's the only time he gets into a lot of Zoom meetings this way. So I adopted him from the City Pound here in Winnipeg in October. And he's been a perfect little addition to the family and to my job.
Awesome. Super cute. So that gets me wondering, what kind of laws are there to protect our pets? Or are there any laws to protect our pets? And if we are pet owners or have a lot of pets, what do we need to know?
Pets are actually pets, companion animals. They are some of the best protected animals under the law. They're actually, in most places, are fairly reasonable laws protecting them. So making sure that they're not treated badly, making sure that if they're going to be euthanized, it's done humanely, making sure that they've got appropriate food or water and access to shelter. I would say with some caveats, pets are definitely the best treated class of animals in society. Some of those caveats involve laws that are still a little bit draconian, that do allow people to chain dogs outdoors for quite some time, including dogs used in the sled industry. But largely, they're treated reasonably well. I think where you see a lot of gaps still is two main areas, and Jess, maybe you want to jump in and add some, because I know you think about this a lot too, but number one is breeding. So dog breeding, cat breeding, rabbit breeding. I've got a foster rabbit right now, so I think about that a lot. It's pretty unregulated still. So in most places, you can just breed whatever animals you want, however many you want, and sell those animals for as much money as you can get from people who might want to buy them. Unfortunately, this leads to a proliferation of breeding in puppy mill-like environments and puppy mill-like conditions, which even when there are laws in place can be difficult to address because these things happen underground, they're quite secret, they're typically in somebody's basement, and it's not like there's inspectors going out there to see how dogs are doing all the time. So I always tell people, like Jess did, you can tell the story better than I can, Jess, but my understanding is you waited a long time actually to find a dog who was a good fit for your family.
Yeah, so for the Toronto Star, I recently wrote a column about the sort of idea of pandemic puppies, particularly now. But it's kind of an ongoing problem before that, even more so now, where everyone's at home and wanting a dog. Just this idea that people wanted a dog and they want what they want it now. And so that's what breeders are really getting their money from, is people wanting what they want and wanting it now. So I waited a long time for this guy. You know, I checked all the time. To find a small dog that needs rescuing is a little more difficult, and especially here in Manitoba, finding sort of the larger dogs. But you just wait, because I'm not going to go buy a dog. I know that here in Canada we have a dog overpopulation problem, and supporting breeders, in my belief, whether or not they're considered reputable, and even that's been called into question now, to get on the Canadian Kennel Club list of reputable breeders apparently doesn't take much. And so I know that I'm going to be part of the solution and not part of the problem by rescuing a dog that is already here and needs a home. The idea is that if you buy from a breeder, that you're essentially sending a pound dog to be euthanized. That's sort of the idea, that you're taking up a spot for a dog that needs a home. So I think here in Canada, the idea of adopt, don't shop should be far more promoted. And there's also a lot of problems with buying from breeders, say online. There's a lot of lack of transparency. A lot of these dogs end up being sick, and there's no guarantee. Some of them are coming in from other countries, as we've seen plane loads of dogs coming in from the Ukraine that were dying and dead. So there's so many problem areas with supporting breeders when it comes to buying puppies. There's just so many great dogs in the shelter. Look at this guy.
So that gets me thinking, And my heart breaks for dogs in countries like Dominican Republic and Mexico and Cuba. And we have so many dogs here as well. But if we have so many dogs and dogs are being euthanized, and we have outreach of people going to other countries and rescuing dogs, which, I mean, I celebrate and I want them to do that, but then they bring them here for adoption and for fostering and all of that. So is that something that people need to worry about? And like I said, it's kind of like a catch-22. I love that they're doing it, but if we already have so many dogs here, is it a smart thing to be doing?
I have sort of mixed opinions about it. I know, for example, this idea that we just talked about of people wanting certain type of dog and they want it now. I think that it is helpful in some ways for people who can only have smaller dogs or want smaller dogs. I know that there's a rescue group here in Winnipeg that brings up small designer dogs from the United States that are up at auctions after they've been used up and won't breed anymore. I don't know what the fate of those dogs would be. So I know that bringing them up here to Winnipeg, where the majority of the dogs you find in shelters, like I said, are sort of large German Shepherd Husky mixes, lab mixes, and not everybody wants that type of dog. So in that way, it benefits that instead of buying a dog, they're going to rescue a dog. But there is also the issue that we are bringing more dogs in general into a country with a noted overpopulation problem. So I don't know what the answer is. Camille, do you?
I think it's one of those, it's a little bit more complex than we can really boil down because there's so many reasons and regional disparities too. You know, you go to the Maritimes right now. My mother lives in PEI, and I hear a lot from folks who live out there that there's just like no possibility of getting any dog right now because the shelters are empty due to the pandemic, and just I think there's fewer dogs to get shipped to the Maritimes from other places. So I think there's regional distinctions there. I would say I think a long-term solution to this question is just really taking a bite out of the domestic dog breeding industry in Canada, trying to make it more difficult for breeders to operate here and to profit from selling dogs that they breed. And, I think when we do that, that'll open up a lot more space for dogs from other countries who need loving homes to be brought to Canada.
I think adopting animals when possible is such a great solution and such a great thing for families to be doing. You mentioned earlier the ag-gag laws that are coming to Canada and starting to be more popular. Are there any other animal protection or animal welfare laws that are coming forward that people should be knowing about?
Yeah, there's a few hot topics right now. So one of those is banning fur farming. You know, we've seen a steady decline in the price of fur over the past number of years because people simply don't think it's okay to wear a product of cruelty anymore. And actually, most people weren't even aware that Canada still farmed animals for fur until recently when we started hearing about mink farm COVID outbreaks. There's been 2 now in Canada, both in British Columbia, but in Europe, there's been tons of outbreaks. There was an outbreak in Utah. And the concern right now is that mink can contract COVID and it might mutate in them and come back to us and be this version that's perhaps less vulnerable to vaccine, and it could cause serious problems, apart from just harming the mink, obviously. So there's huge mobilization right now for actually outlawing these fur farms on a national level or perhaps a provincial level. And the BC government is seriously considering doing this in light of those outbreaks. So I think that's a topic that's not going to go away anytime soon. There's fewer farms in Canada than there ever have been because of changing appetites around fur. So that's really exciting. And then there's a great bill right now in the Senate put forward by Senator Murray Sinclair, an amazing advocate for Indigenous issues, environmental issues, animal rights issues. And his new bill would actually ban keeping elephants and great apes in captivity right across the country, which would be just an incredible step forward and bring us solidly into a more progressive stance on animals. So I'm really excited about that too. And
Jane Goodall Act, that's what it's called, the Jane Goodall Act.
Yeah, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And actually, in my home province of Ontario, where you're both located as well, of course, they passed new animal welfare legislation last year, and now they're creating regulations to accompany it. And the devil's always in the details. So the regulations might be really, really good. They might do things like regulate and perhaps outlaw some types of exotic animals used as pets, which can be really harmful for them and for wild populations. So anyone who's listening who wants to learn more about that, they can visit our website. But also, it's never a bad time to contact your political representative and just tell them that you want stronger laws, because there's always an opportunity.
I like that. And I think that's a really great idea. What kind of laws have you passed or worked on to help pass most recently that you're really proud of, that you want to make sure everybody knows about?
Well, the biggest one, obviously, is going to be the whale and dolphin ban that we passed a couple years ago through Parliament. So that was mid-2019. Again, a bill from Senator Murray Sinclair, total champion. And, it cracks down on facilities like Marineland and Vancouver Aquarium, which have been notorious over the years for deaths of whales and dolphins, terrible conditions, just heartbreaking situations where these beautiful, majestic animals are swimming around tiny tanks. And we as a country just don't accept that anymore. So these bills passed. It was a very difficult fight. It took 3.5 years to get this law through, but eventually, in the end, justice prevailed. And around the same time, I'll just add this in, Canada passed international export-import ban on shark fin products, which is also huge. Sharks, not quite as warm and cuddly. They don't quite have the reputation that whales and dolphins do, but they're amazing creatures. And unfortunately, about 70 million plus of them are killed every year for their fins. That's a very cruel process where their fins are sliced off while they're still alive. They're thrown back into the ocean, and they often suffocate or get eaten to death because they can no longer swim or breathe. So terrible situation, but we took a really progressive move and took a chunk out of that trade.
It's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's amazing work that Animal Justice is doing and you are both doing. So thank you so much for all of that. What are you working on right now at Animal Justice that you want to share with our audience?
The most exciting thing we've got going on right now is called the Animal Justice Academy, which started the last week of January. And it is a free 6-week online boot camp course for animal activists. So it's designed to give people the tools and the skills they need to become empowered, to become more active in their communities, in politics, in the media. Just is doing a great module about how to write a letter to the editor, for instance. We've got over 80 instructors just from a whole diverse array of perspectives, teaching everybody how to become a more effective advocate for animals. So as I mentioned, it's free. Not too late to sign up. We're on week 2 right now, and you can join at any point. There's a bunch of online modules that you can watch. And then we all meet weekly for a couple of live sessions. So really cool resource. We hope it will help be a game changer for animals in this country and beyond.
And there's already thousands of people signed up.
Yeah, almost 5,000.
Wow. So thank you for making that accessible to everybody. What age group would you recommend? Is this a family thing? Is it like 18 and over, PG? I know every child is different and can handle different things. So what can people expect to be exposed to?
It's mostly pretty non-graphic. I think for most children, it's probably appropriate. The first week has some modules that kind of explain the extent of the problem. So that's probably the only session where a parent might want to supervise. It gets into some of the details of what we do to animals on farms and labs and so on. And sometimes that's not a very pretty picture, so it could be a little sensitive for children. But most of it is designed to be very kid-friendly and empower people of all ages to take action. I personally know a 12-year-old who's participating right now and having a great time. So yeah, it's definitely not exclusive to over 18.
Great. Perfect. I'm going to be sensitive towards your time and towards Adam's need for editing and all of that. But I did have another question. In terms of zoos, there are some zoos that might be better than others. There are some zoos that might take animals that were injured that couldn't be released back into the wild. There are some zoos that breed animals. How do we navigate when we want to be more vegan? A lot of our listeners are definitely vegan. I'd say probably a bigger percent are saying they're more plant-based, but we know as plant-based as we are, we start to become more vegan over time. So how do you navigate deciding if you can support the zoo? Your child's love for animals might click when you're in a zoo and see the majestic animals because you can't afford to go on safari, and that's probably a whole other story. So how do we navigate the zoo life in Canada?
I get this question a lot as a parent. I know that if my daughter were to have a zoo field trip through school, she would be going that day. In my opinion, there's a big difference between zoos and sanctuaries, zoos and refuges, zoos and nature preserves. For me, the first and foremost goal of a zoo is to make money and to entertain the public. I mean, animals are kept in exhibits, right? That's what they're called. The point of those exhibits is to showcase the animal to an audience, not necessarily for the benefit of the animal. I know not all zoos are created equally, especially when you're talking across the globe. Different countries definitely have different degrees of quality care of animals. But ethically, I don't believe that zoos are there for the benefit of animals completely at all, and that there's better ways for children to learn about animals. I always use the idea that we can get kids to fall in love with dinosaurs without having to see them in real life. So thankfully, especially in this age of such modern technology and interactive technology, I think there's excellent ways for children to learn about animals, to connect with animals without having to see an elephant or an orangutan in an unnaturally small environment where they can't exhibit natural behaviors or have the territory space that they would normally ever have. So I would take my daughter to a farmed animal sanctuary if she needs to pet an animal before I would go to a zoo, that's for sure.
I completely agree with all of that. And the only thing to add, I guess, is that there's been a growing push in recent years to see some zoos convert into those sanctuaries. So not just for farmed animals, but for exotic animals. We've got in Ontario, for example, there's tons of exotic animals who are used in the pet trade, many of whom end up being given to animal shelters because their parents just can't care for them. You know, if you think about a monkey or a large cat or a snake or a reptile, most people have no idea what those animals need. And they tragically end up being euthanized most of the time. So I think zoos could play a real role in contributing to something positive that's a solution to that situation instead of just putting animals on display. So I think that there's a place for what we now know as zoos, but it has to be a very different model, much more based on providing sanctuary than simply showing off and putting on a show.
Thank you.
Great information, lots there, and thank you so much for sharing it. If people want to reach out to either of you, where would be the best place for them to go?
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, I'm Camille Labchuk, Labchuk on both of those. Animaljustice.ca is a good route too.
On Twitter, I'm Jess L. Reed, and on Instagram, I'm Jess LSR, where I share a lot of my vegan meals and vegan cooking and vegan parenting.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing, not just for everyone, for all of Canada, and hopefully to be leaders in the world in terms of animal protection and animal justice. Thank you both so much for being here today.
And we'll link to everything you mentioned in our show notes at planttrainers.com. Thank you both so much for being on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Such a pleasure, and thanks for everything you're doing to inspire change too.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it really helps other people find us, just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.